And welcome to this episode of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Well, how are you today? I hope you're doing well. Hope you're taking a little bit of time for yourself. I am certainly absolutely stoked to have you here as a listener, and I'm glad to be here for you. Today, we're going to be discussing something that I generally will commit an entire radio show to about twice a year. You know, as an advisor and fiduciary of almost going on 30 years now, it's kind of interesting to me that there are certain kind of peak times throughout the year in which I see more people preparing for retirement. And I think one of the more peak seasons, if I can call it that, is going to be the last quarter of every single year. Generally about this time, it's around October, the beginning of the last quarter, and they're kind of gearing up for retirement. Now, maybe they've been thinking about it a while, but they haven't really ever said anything to their boss. Maybe they have been hinting for a while. Maybe they've already had a very strong final discussion with their employer about retirement. But this is just one of those moments throughout the course of the year that I find the conversations about retirement and being done at the end of the year, at the very beginning of the year, it kind of peaks up in volume and it peaks in momentum. And so today we're going to be exploring not how do you have that conversation with your employer. I'm going to leave that up to you. Maybe someday we'll do a radio show on it. It could be kind of an interesting topic, but we're going to be touching on something that is extremely valuable, but also something that can create a great deal of stress in a retiree's life, and that is the pension. And that's why today we're going to be calling today's episode Pension Tensions. Now, maybe you have a pension. Maybe you're lucky enough you have more than one pension. But you know, pensions are something that are really not in vogue anymore. Pensions are something that are kind of disappearing. They're not as common with employers as they once were. And a pension is oftentimes confused with a 401k, a 403b, a 457 plan. And so the first thing that we kind of want to start out with is understanding that a pension is considered a defined benefit program. It has a defined benefit that it's going to pay. When you think of things like 401ks and 403bs and 457 plans, those things are all defined contribution programs. You have a defined contribution that you make every single year. The employer matches that. That's why it's called a defined contribution plan. Now, here's the thing. With retirees today, currently in the United States, it's hard to gauge. It's hard to be exacting with this, but only around 20 to 25% at best of retirees have pensions. And a pension is basically a guaranteed system of income that you will receive for the rest of your life if you were the employee that participated in that pension. Now, when it comes to employers today, especially in the private corporate world, we know that it's obviously very expensive to fund pensions. And this is one of the reasons why private corporations have gotten away from funding pensions. They want to be able to save the bottom line. They want to be able to focus on that and increase their profitability. And how much easier to do that when you have a limited, say, match that you're going to be putting into that program for your employee. So in this case, a little bit better, I would say a little bit more accurate of an assessment of how many employers today in the United States still provide pensions, that's around 15%. If you go back, way back into the 80s and 90s, it was hard to find employers that didn't have pensions. So we know that the world has changed considerably. Now, if you're brand new to this radio show, number one, I want to welcome you to the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. But more importantly, I want to encourage you, go to our website, johnsonwim.com. The world of retirement is a very complex one, and there's so many different variables and so many different things that we can be facing as decisions that we have to make in retirement. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. Sometimes you can be feeling as though you're the only person that is making these decisions and you don't know how to make them because you don't know what you don't know. Well, that's where the website, johnsonwim.com, can be a very valuable resource. Not only can you watch past YouTube videos to study and explore topics that maybe you're interested in, but there's a tremendous amount of resource in white papers and past radio shows that will give you an opportunity to be able to further your understanding of what it really takes to be a successful retiree. A retiree that not only has principal that is protected for the rest of their life, but they have more income than what they need. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty good definition of a successful retiree. If you're more the hands-on type, I also encourage you, get a copy of my book, The Capitalized Retirement. You can buy it from all of the major book resellers or retailers, whether it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whoever it may be, and it is fairly priced. So getting back to these pensions, what are some of the things that we need to be aware of about pensions, other than the fact that pensions are becoming less and less popular with employers and fewer employees actually have the pension? Well, one of the things that I think has become very, very clear, especially since the turn of the century, that I think is even fresh in people's minds from 2022 and beyond, is the fact that pensions are obviously taking on a great deal of liability, and it is a gamble. That pension is gambling, and this sounds completely horrible, but it's true when you think about it. The pension is really gambling that you're going to die early, while you're gambling that you're going to live longer than expected. And you see, when an employer pays into a pension and then ultimately that retiree retires and they turn on that pension and they receive income, that income is guaranteed from that pension to that employee for the rest of their life. And sometimes going even further than that, obligating an income to a surviving spouse, which we're going to talk about shortly. Now, what this means is that the pension has to be funded properly with plenty of money. A pension has to be funded with the right kind of investments, and the pension needs to be able to be well managed. Now, if we think back about what happened in 2021. 2021, we as a nation were recovering from COVID, and obviously the economy is extremely stalled. And so we've got to get the economy off the ground. So what do? What's the fastest way to get the economy up and running? What's the fastest and most effective way to get you to spend your money? Well, one of the easiest and fastest ways to do that is to drop interest rates to zero. And that's exactly what our government did. Now, by doing that, guess what? People were buying cars like crazy. People were building homes and originating 30-year mortgages, and corporations were borrowing money at low interest rates. And boy, did that get things going. But it also created inflation. So we have to fast forward to the end of 2021, get into 2022. And what do we know happened in February of 2022? Well, that's where the Federal Reserve said, oopsie, we went too far. We left interest rates too low for too long. Now we have inflation that's out of control. Now we've got to get things under control. We have to do the opposite of what we did in 2021. And boy, did they. They raised interest rates on the American taxpayer, not once, not twice, not 4 or 5 times, but 11 times over the course of the next 2 years. Now, why is that relevant? Why does that have any bearing at all whatsoever to a pension? Well, remember that pensions are dealing with a lot of liability. The liability is basically all of these employees that this pension is obligated to provide income to for the rest of that person's life. And so as a result, you'll find that depending upon the pension, there could be as much as 50% or more of that pension and the money within that pension bucket sitting in bonds. Now, why is that relevant to you? Well, when interest rates started to go up by the Federal Reserve, do you remember back in 2022 when the Fed started doing that and all of a sudden we started having, say, certain banks fail and they were failing at record speed? Well, that's because the bank that had gone out and bought bonds to be able to secure the money or the interest rate that they were paying their merchants, well, when interest rates go up, bonds fall in value. And if a pension that has this ongoing liability to provide income to this employee for a very, very long time, for their entire lifetime, if one of the primary investment tools within that pension is bonds, and the Federal Reserve raises interest rates and those bonds fall in value significantly, now all of a sudden that can adversely affect the pension itself. In addition to that, we have to also keep in mind that pensions over the course of time, they also have exposure to stocks. They have exposures to equities and all sorts of various different alternative investments. Now, granted, that should probably make up a smaller percentage of the overall pension. However, over the course of time, especially leading up to 2007, we saw many different pensions that were maybe pushing the envelope, maybe sticking a little too much money, right, into the equity side of the equation. Why? Because they just seem to continue to be rewarded. So why not? Well, it turns out that when a bubble breaks, it breaks hard and typically quite fast. And we all know from our history books that from 2007 to 2009, that's when we as Americans experienced a tremendous 50 to maybe even as much as 60% sell-off in the stock market. And that, too, had a tangible impact on pensions. So this sounds terrible. This sounds like it's very scary and maybe quite dangerous to own a pension. Well, it can be. If we think of companies like, for instance, GM or Bethlehem Steel, a big example would be United Airlines, where they had over $9.8 billion of unprotected liabilities in their pension. This is a problem because if it's mismanaged, it can affect you, the employee who's trying to retire. And this is income you've counted on. Now, sit tight. As we come back to the second half, we're going to be discussing pensions and pension elections. And this is going to be the part that you're going to want to pay the most careful attention to. Sit tight. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the second half of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. If you're just joining us, welcome to today's program. Today, we're discussing something called the pension. Now, for many, they don't have a pension. All they have is the 401k and Social Security, maybe a 403b, maybe some IRAs, some personal investments. Pensions are not simply as common as they used to be with employers or with employees. But if you have one, you need to consider yourself to be maybe one of the lucky ones. Around only 1 in 4, 1 in 5 workers in America have access to a pension. And a pension is something that is a defined benefit program. This is something that's going to pay you an income stream for the rest of your life. Now, if you're a state worker, if you're a postal worker, if you work for a large corporation, you're going to find that pensions are more common. But with the smaller employers, they just simply don't have the capital. They don't have the money and the resources to be able to fund pensions. So we kind of talked about the ugly part of a pension. We know that pensions obviously have to be well funded. Part of the reason why United Airlines lost their pension, and their pension went belly up, and there was over 120,000 employees that simply got robbed of their pension, was because it was underfunded. It was funded improperly. It was managed improperly by United Airlines. We've seen this take place with many other companies over the course of time. The Teamsters, GM, Bethlehem Steel, the list is pretty long and lengthy. But over the course of time, there has been rules, there's been regulations, there's been certain parameters put into play. And I think overall, there has been a greater degree of accountability that has been required from employees or from employers by employees for pensions. And so, though you're never going to get rid of all the scoundrels in the world, chances are, if you have a pension, it's probably pretty decent. Now, that brings us to this point of, if you're going to retire, you're going to have to make a decision about your pension. How are you going to take it? And so we want to take a little bit of time today to explore the various different election options that you have, and that's what they call it. Now, granted, when you get ready to retire, you tell the employer you're going to retire, their chances are going to give you a packet of information. There's going to be a lot of information there. And of course, it's written by lawyers for lawyers, but for the most part, I'd say that pension paperwork and pension information is pretty straightforward. Now, we're going to talk about 4 different options. The 4 different ways that are most common for you to be able to get your pension. The first way that we're going to discuss is something that's called period certain. And this is probably, I would say, one of the simplest, one of the easiest ways of being able to understand how a pension is going to distribute this bucket of money to you. Now, a period certain just basically says, listen, we're going to give you 4 different options. We're going to give you 5 years, we're going to give you 10 years, we're going to give you 15 years, or we're going to give you 20 years. And this period certain basically says that if you pick, say, the 10-year time frame, you're going to get 100% of the bucket of money that represents your pension paid out to you every single month, or whatever mode you want to take. And at the end of the 10 years, it's going to be done. You will have received all of your money. Now, is that such a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, because here's the thing. You will know that you received 100% of your money paid out to you by the end of the time frame. So you don't have to sit there and try to maintain good health. You could just turn on the pension, receive it all in 5 years, and be done with it. Now, here's the thing. We do want to be mindful of the fact that pensions are taxable income. So if we're receiving a tremendous amount of payout from a pension, that is going to affect our overall taxes that we have to pay for, just receiving income. So bear that in mind. Meet with your tax preparer and discuss what the implication of that taxable income every month or every year might be to you and to your situation. Now, the second, we'll say, settlement option is going to be something that's called life with period certain. Now, we kind of understand period certain as a time frame. Now, life with period certain, however, is a bit of a twist on that one. And you notice that something was added to the title, and that was the life part. So what this basically says is you're going to receive the income under this pension election for the rest of your life. If you live another 20 years, you're going to get it for 20 years. If you live for 22 years, you're going to receive it all 22 years. If you live until you're 114, well, guess what? You're going to continue to receive it until you're 114 because of the life contingency. However, it's life with period certain. So let's go back to the periods. 5 years, 10 years, 15, and 20 years. What is that for? Well, what that really represents is the time frame or the contingency, the obligation that you are making the pension have towards a loved one. a family member, a beneficiary of some sort. So let's say you chose life with 20-year period certain. If you were to, say, get run over by the big yellow bus in year 6, now, if you're married and that was your beneficiary, your surviving spouse will receive that same amount of monthly income every month for the remaining 14 years until that 20-year period certain time frame has been achieved. Now, this then brings us to the next option. The next option is called life only. Life only is obviously going to pay you a monthly income, and it's going to pay it to you for the rest of your life. Okay? It's kind of like life with period certain, except you're going to typically find that with life only, it's the biggest monthly benefit that you see of all the benefit elections that pension paperwork is going to show you. You're going to find that it's typically a very attractive monthly benefit. It's going to be the biggest one. Well, why is that? Well, that's primarily because the pension, again, remember, it's gambling that you're going to die and you're gambling that you're going to live. And so if you were to pass away, no matter if you got run over by the big yellow bus 6 months after turning on this pension, or you lived another 26 and a half years, whenever you die, that pension is done. There is absolutely zero survivorship benefit whatsoever. Now, what's number 4? Well, number 4 is going to be more appropriate for you if you are married. It's going to be more appropriate if you want to provide survivorship benefits. And in fact, it's often called joint and survivor options. Now, here's the thing. You need to understand that a life with joint and survivor option is going to pay you income for life, just like the life only will, just like the life with period certain will. However, you get to decide what percentage of your check, your pension benefit, is going to be paid to your surviving spouse. And generally, pensions keep this pretty simple. They say 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100%. Now, this is very important, especially for gentlemen, because when you think about it, our counterparts are typically going to outlive us. And so what that means is we want to be thinking about them. If we die, how much of our monthly benefit do we want them to receive? So let's just make up a number. Let's say that I'm receiving a total of $1,350 every single month for my pension. If I have a joint and survivor option that pays 100%, to my survivor, that means that guess what? She's going to get all $1,300. If I happen, however, to say, you know what? I want 50%. Well, guess what? She's now only going to get $650, or half, exactly half of what my monthly benefit was after I die. So these are all options that we have to decide how are we going to take the option. But I somewhat misled you because I suggested that there was 4 options, when in reality, there very well may be 5. And this is the part that you want to pay attention to the most. We know that we live in a very crazy world today. We know that more and more it seems as though the government is getting its fingers into our stock market, into our corporate world. We're seeing our government take stakes in certain companies, which I'm very nervous about. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I hope it goes well, but I always cringe a little bit when I see our government encroaching into private equity. When we think about pensions, when we think about income, when we think about the longevity of human life, when we think about the craziness of the stock market and the interest rate market and the bond market, it makes a person wonder, is it really worth me taking all of this money that is technically mine and leaving it in the hands of a pension company to invest as they see fit? Maybe this is an opportunity for you to consider taking that money in a 5th pension election called lump sum. Now, what is lump sum? Bear in mind that you may not actually have access to lump summing your pension, But a lump sum option allows you to take 100% of the money that's in your bucket and roll it totally tax-free into an IRA. And there's obviously a downside to that, because maybe where you invest it, you could lose it. And maybe where you invest it privately, you won't get as much income out of that money as you would have had you left it in the pension. So that's always something you have to consider. But I do want you to think about a few benefits, a few potential things that could affect you and your family positively. Number one, if you do have access to roll it, you can roll it tax-free, as I said. But guess what? That means that 100% of that money is now yours. You see, when you have a pension and you're getting the income, you can't call up the company and say, hey, I want more income this month. But if you've rolled it over and you have that money sitting in an IRA, all of that money is yours. If you want to take some of it out and go buy a boat, you can go do that. It'll be taxable, but you can do it. Number two, you know that if, God forbid, you died, all of that money is going to be there and available for your surviving spouse. And number three, God forbid, if both of you die, you know 100% of that money will be available as a legacy to your kids. And my friends, that's one thing that pensions are not good at. They are not good at providing legacy to children. So I hope you've learned a thing or two about pensions. Hopefully, if you have a pension, you're reaching out to your fiduciary, to a fiduciary, to help you make that life-affecting decision and make a good one so that you can have a successful retirement, a retirement in which you have more income than what you need. I'm Matthew Johnson. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.